that. My name is Carolyn Norton. I'm the Director of Cloud Services here at Velosio. I help organizations in their cloud journey, whether you have a cloud presence today, you want to expand that cloud presence, or you're just starting your journey, we're here to help and make sure that you have a successful adoption.
And I'm Steve Schneiderman. I'm an account executive at Microsoft. Been here for 6 years. My territory is Arizona and Colorado, but I also have some customers all over the United States. Don't specialize in a particular vertical, but I've been at this for over 40 years, so I probably touched every vertical at one point or another. And this topic is an important topic for a lot of different reasons, both technical and business, and I'm happy to be here today to contribute to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's always fun to have you with us and lend your perspective and expertise. So let's kick this off with a poll question to get a sense of the room and a pulse check on what everyone has going on right now. So you should see a poll pop up. That question is, if you're currently running Windows Server, what version are you running right now? And think about your infrastructure in its current state and what version it's running.
And it's okay if you don't know.
Fair enough. Okay, let's give a couple more minutes to get that feedback.
All right, it looks like we have the majority of people here who have responded, and it looks like most of the people on the line here running 2012 and 2012 R2. You're definitely in the right place. Some people on an older version, handful unsure. Thanks to everyone who responded.
Great.
This is very telling and good to know that this is really the sweet spot and what we're trying to target today, and make sure you have some game plans and some options here. So let's put it out there. Let's put it on Front Street. How did you guys get here? How did we get here? Steve, what's your perspective? What causes an organization to have, you know, such a, at this point, I mean, 2012 is at least a decade old at this point. How do organizations get there? What's your perspective?
You know, I mean, it's a mixture of things, right? I mean, everything, I think, from not fully grasping what value a cloud migration could possibly bring to their organization, and not just from a technical perspective, but from a business perspective. And then there's just naturally just fears, you know, there's a million different fears, whether it's security or compliance, administration, costs, et cetera. And they're all legitimate fears, right? And we're not here today to, you know, to throw mud at any of them. But, you know, here we are, a year ago, we announced that 2012 was going end of life. And so we're a couple of weeks away, and customers are scrambling right now. They're absolutely scrambling for information because they know it's coming up for end of life. They didn't move on it soon enough to do something in a more proactive fashion. And so now it's all about this extended support. And it's an expensive option. There are other options, which we're going to talk about today.
I wholeheartedly agree. I know, you know, from a technical perspective, there is a plethora of things that the technical team worries about. They're worried about what's the cost. Maybe there's a compatibility issue that's holding an organization back. Maybe 2012 was the version that ran with certain workloads on premise, and that held up the progress for whatever reason. Maybe there was, to your point, maybe there was a fear of disrupting things, because we are talking about the core piece of software that runs the organization, Windows, right? We all know Windows, and it's the platform and the underlying system that makes all things work. But if we're thinking about touching it or doing anything with it, there's always that inherent fear and risk. And then sometimes it's just, you know, you don't know what your options are. Maybe there's a lack of expertise or even time. Maybe you know what needs to happen, but, you know, I think most organizations can easily say that there is noise every single day. There's always I need to get this done now. There are different priorities that come up. For whatever reason, the noise kind of takes your attention off of something like the end of life that was announced a year ago, and so
And if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? I mean,
that's true.
with to your point, with all the priorities that cross through our customers' desks on a daily basis and fire alarms, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, if those servers off on the racks in that room or, in another data center facility are just churning away and nothing's wrong with them, why would you worry about moving them? But really, that's kind of ass backwards, the way you should be looking at it. You need to look at it more from a business perspective of what would you gain from a business perspective, as opposed to just looking at it, well, technically it's working, so why worry about it?
Right. That's that short term, well, it's fine and it's okay for now, but then like anything else, it gets pushed to the back, and then all of a sudden it forces its way forward, and now you need to make sure you have time and attention towards, again, this particular issue. So I can certainly understand why an organization gets here. There's so much going on. There's so many responsibilities. There might be other priorities. There might be even vendor lock-ins, right? Maybe there's some contract or requirement or
legacy apps. Yeah.
right. The application. I mean, there's a plethora of reasons why. But the unfortunate thing is now, regardless of all those valid reasons, right? We're at a point where we have to take action. And you never want to be in a scenario like that where you're kind of, now you have to make a choice fast, regardless of all these valid, reasons why you haven't done it. And that
it may not be a good decision.
Yeah, it's done a little bit in haste. It's a little bit to, get it done for the sake of getting it done, which is, it has to be addressed. But in an ideal scenario, you want to make sure you're taking time to assess these things, and, maybe little by little start to plan what your next course of action is going to be. So really good interaction on the poll question really helps us understand, where you're at and why you're here. We expect that you're somewhere in that 2012 range, but it's always helpful to know that. So I have another poll question for everyone. So we talked about end of life in Windows 2012, but we're also curious to understand what workloads you have in the cloud today. I mentioned earlier that I work with organizations that are either starting their journey or they have something in the cloud already. And when we talk about cloud, it can be anything from, business productivity like Microsoft 365, maybe it's your ERP solution, maybe it's your CRM solution, maybe it's some other resource workload, what have you, that's hosted somewhere else in the cloud, and your organization has it out there. So I'm curious to see, how much you have in the cloud, what particular items you have in the cloud, and get a sense. So let's give everyone some time to provide some insights.
All right, we'll give just a couple more seconds. Looks like we're getting close to having the majority of people responding here.
Need a drum roll.
I almost want to bet on which one is going to be the top one, but
I'm betting you probably could have guessed this one, right? That the Office and productivity tools came out on top. Most people have that in the cloud, it looks like. And then a nice even spread around the people who have ERP, CRM, and other applications in the cloud.
I find this very encouraging.
Yes, to be exact. I mean, it's great because of a lot of organizations, honest feedback here, I get cringe a little bit when I hear organizations say that the cloud is new. It really isn't. It's been around for long enough now. It's not the newest thing anymore. So at this point, it's good to hear that you've adopted some cloud in the organization, given that it's been around a healthy amount of time now. It's not, bleeding edge, cutting edge. You don't have to worry too much. It's really been baked out, significantly since it started with Microsoft many moons ago. So it's encouraging to hear that and see that you guys have some sort of presence inside the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I had to look it up online to see when Azure was first commercially announced, and it was, I think, 13 years ago.
Yep.
And so I was like, wow, that's cool, right? Because you can't say, well, it's new, it's that newfangled technology, I don't want to touch it, I'm scared of it. No, it's not new, it's been around forever. And if you're not using it, why aren't you using it?
Yeah.
And, when I first started with Microsoft 6 years ago, I still had many customers that were totally on-prem. They weren't even running, Word and Excel in the cloud. They were running it off of just CDs, you know. And I'm like, how do you, get to be a business that's worth millions and millions of dollars with hundreds and hundreds of employees scattered across offices around the United States or maybe even the world, and you're running on-prem? It doesn't make any sense. And
And in the,
so,
and in the 2010s, I think it really skyrocketed for a number of different reasons. Azure being introduced, to your point, and just the evolution of technology. As I feel like that's when things really hit the ground running. We always had internet and some form of this or that, but I think everyone, I don't know if it was a general consciousness where people started just clicking and starting to adopt, which is pretty cool. But yeah, CDs and
it's funny, when you look at kind of the laggards or slow adopters, they're the ones with the AOL.com email addresses,
yeah.
or Juno.com or something like
Hey,
that.
I like my AO. No, I'm teasing.
But I think you're right. I mean, especially once the internet got really super commercialized, people began realizing that, oh, there's this big thing out there that I'm not taking advantage of that I probably could and should. And so, I think, today, while we're going to address, your options around 2012 and what you can do, really the underlying message is, what more can you do beyond just buying ESU for 2012? What more can you do for your business, right?
100% agreed. And I think at this point now, to some degree, cloud is demystified, right? Technology is somewhat demystified. I mean, there's so much information out there. There's entertainment information, there's regular information, there's videos, there's blogs or posts, if that's something that you're looking at. So a lot of the mystery that existed in the past should, for the most part, be gone. But regardless of that, we want to make sure that we're talking through, again, addressing this up and coming end of life, which again is coming very soon. And
Yep.
what are your options? Let's make sure we discuss addressing the immediate, right? What's up and coming. And then let's also take an opportunity to look at what else, because there could be other things that are dormant or again pushed to the back of the queue that need to be bubbled up or considered or start to rehashing.
Mhm.
So with that, let's look at our options. So we got a couple of options here that we can talk about in terms of end of life. Again, Windows Server 2012 and Windows Server 2012 R2 is ending life on October 10th. This was announced. Both of the operating systems are going away, and effectively, Steve, what does that mean? Do you happen to know what that means? What does end of life mean, just for those that don't know?
Means goodbye support for the most part. No more upgrades to that operating system, but no support, no security, right? And so what you have today is what you got and you'll have tomorrow if you don't do something. And the challenge is that hackers love when companies like Microsoft make announcements about end of life, right? They're looking to see what's coming. They probably have their calendars lined with attacks all scheduled out for the next year based upon end of life announcements. And it makes sense, right? I mean, and so, it's up to you as the end user to make intelligent decisions for your business about what you will and will not support internally. And I, for one, don't want to see you open up the ransomware landscape simply because you didn't take the necessary steps.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So what? So what if I don't get support? So what if I don't get security updates? What does that really mean? What concerns as an organization does that really? Because it's running right now, it's fine.
It is running, and it'll probably, the likelihood is it probably will continue to run, right? I mean, there are people out there, as we saw in the poll, who are running 2003, and here we are 21 years later. So we make
Oh
good
gosh,
stuff, right?
don't say
But
that.
the fact is, hackers are targeting, end of life products, and so you need to be painfully aware of it and just understand the potential risks. I spoke with a customer yesterday who said, well, we think we have things fairly well segmented. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he tried to explain the way he had his architecture set up and his firewalls. I said, ultimately, though, they are exposed to an online connection somewhere in your architecture, right? And he's like, well, yeah, I'm done. So, he just kind of laughed and he was like, "No, now you're making me think twice. And then I had another customer last Friday who was like, Steve, I've got 3 weeks to go. We got to do something. I'm like, why are we having this conversation now? Why didn't we have this conversation a year ago or 2 years ago? I mean, because let's just say you go ahead and well, let's take these doors one at a time. Let's just run through them.
Sure,
Let's
let's go to the
right.
first.
So,
Let's
your
go to
first
the
door
first
is
one.
do nothing, right? And what are the pros here? Well, you're going to save money, obviously, because extended support is expensive, right? And so good for you. You've conserved cash while putting your company at risk. I mean,
It's harsh, but true.
I'm
It
not
is.
one to
I
I'm
mean,
not one to mince words, those who know me, and I see some of my customers on the call, but at the end of the day, right? I mean, you've got to be fiscally prudent, but balance it with risk. And so if you've got a lot of your data on-prem on Windows 2012 R2 servers, come October 10th, you have no security. You've got whatever's baked into that last version, and that's it.
that's the biggest concern is the lack of support. So let's pretend you do nothing and you have a critical piece of software application running your business, legacy or not, however old it is, it's doing what it needs to do and it's running the organization, right? So if something goes sideways, now you have a scenario where you're going to be handcuffed to how much support you're going to get for the operating system. You might get lucky, but again, now you're really rolling the dice on whether or not you're going to be able to fix the problem. And
Well,
then
it's that too. Plus, it's been my experience in the 6 years I've been at Microsoft that the customers who wait for the last minute and then decide option one is right for them, do nothing. It's kind of endemic of the culture of do nothing, you know? And I'm not saying this to be mean or dispirited, it's just the truth. It's the people who tend to let these types of things languish, unattended, without thought, and just take a roll of the dice, so to speak, on it. They're the ones that are predominantly technically immature, don't have a roadmap to get to the cloud, maybe foundationally lack the skilling. And those are the things that they really need to concentrate on, get themselves educated now in advance of these types of events and put themselves in a position where they can make an intelligent decision, right? On
maybe
what that
have
roadmap.
a long game, like a prescriptive timeline
Yeah.
to ramp up, right? Not just jump right in, which is effectively what we're talking about right now, is just jumping right in
Yeah.
and addressing the concerns. And the support, to your point, is right. That's part of it, but you're and I say this all the time, hackers just like love every pinhole opportunity that they have. And most organizations that we speak to, and trust me, I very much like you, Steve. I talk to organizations all the time, and we have all these conversations. We talk about the value and why, and then for whatever reason, they do nothing, which is well within their right and totally understandable. Maybe there's things I'm not aware of that affect the decision. But what I hate, and it makes it hard, is when they suffer some sort of event, whether it's a minor disruption, which is still not ideal, to a major disruption. I mean, we've read it or we've seen another organization go through it, and it's just not a good scenario where everyone has to be hands on deck, all
Right.
hands on deck to try to bring everything back to normal. And what people don't realize is it's not only the effort it takes to take everything back online. It's like, you could wear protective gear when you're out there doing sports. I'm using an analogy,
Mhm.
and try to avoid a possible broken bone. But if you don't wear anything, you're more likely to break a bone. And then when you break that bone, it takes that much longer to heal. Now you're uncomfortable. Now you're not really able to do everything that you could have done in the past. There's so many different things that come of avoiding that one thing. And the
Yeah.
same applies to security, right? Okay, if it happens, not only do you have to let this bone heal, but now you have to deal with how does it affect your public presence? How does it affect your business? How does it affect your processes? Who do you have to work with to address how this all happened in the first? I mean, there's so many different things. It's just not,
It,
it's never a fun scenario.
it's not a position you want to find yourself in, right? And I had a customer at the beginning of July who had an event, and prior to that, when I was imploring him to get some foundational understanding and why he needed to do certain things. It was kind of talk to the hand, Microsoft. I've got this covered. And then July 5th, they got infiltrated, and it was severe enough to require our Microsoft team to kind of zoom in and hundreds of thousands of dollars later, and one director of security later, they were standing back up again with a different attitude. So, when I look at option one, I don't really think it's a valid option. I'm sorry, I'm going to be dismissive on this one.
It's funny you say that. July 5th, it's oddly enough, hackers love to get holidays in there because they know people are not necessarily always paying attention. But to your point, yes, not one of the best options. It is an option, so we present it because, in fact, it is something that an organization can choose, is not do anything and ride the risk. And sometimes you're fine, but let's move on to option two. Let's see what option two brings. So decommissioning servers. What does that look like, Steve?
Well, it's funny. I was speaking with the director at a hospital not too long ago, and he said a big part of his job was constantly taking inventory of all the tools and systems that they have running in their infrastructure and looking for places where it's only 1 or 2 users still using it. And they're still paying, hellacious amounts of money to license software and systems, pay for annual support. And so it's quite possible that if you do a similar type of inventory exercise of your infrastructure, you may find that a good portion of your older servers running 2012 or R2, perhaps you can shut them off. Maybe you don't need them. Maybe you can replace those 1 or 2 users with other tools or access to data in other ways. And so decommissioning usually makes a lot of sense. And it's a good first step, even before if you decide to buy ESU. Let's diminish that number of servers from a couple of hundred down to maybe just a couple of dozen.
And this is something that an organization should be doing proactively, at least, what would you say, at once a quarter, once a year, where they're just assessing?
Minimally once a year, right? Minimally, we call them, infrastructure assessments or Azure assessments. I don't know, if you guys have a different parlance for it, but at the end of the day, it's a question of taking an inventory, understanding how old your boxes are from a bare metal perspective. Are they ready to fail? How old is the software? How many people are actually using the software that's running on the servers? And is there a way to consolidate, and decommission some of them? So, this is a great way to reduce your footprint. It's a great way to reduce your expenses, both in terms of the bare metal and the people that have to take care of it, and power and cooling and all the rest of that stuff.
And the life, to your point, and the support.
Yeah, and the support, right? I think, you just have to be careful that you don't shut something off, which you'll find out 30 days later, oops, what happened to that server? It's in the closet. We need to connect it back up because we made a mistake. And so just make sure you're interviewing your users and don't make decisions in the dark, right?
Oh man, I say it twice, say it all as loud so people from the back can hear it. Absolutely. This is definitely something that you want to have some key stakeholders in the organization weigh in on, right? If there are particular workloads that are used by certain departments or users, get their feedback. So that way, again, the goal here is to save everyone some heartache and get the job done and achieve the goal that's necessary here. So that's option one, and there's option two. Let's go into option three. So option three talks about ESUs, extended security updates, and you kind of touched on that a little bit, but inside of option three, what is ESUs and how are they an option for an organization that's running 2012?
Well, as you see here, there's 3 different options for deploying it and securing it. You just have to look at your environment. Most people are just going to go probably for option 1 for extended security updates with regards to the virtual machines. But really the best of all of these 3 options is option 2, and that's to leverage Azure Arc. Azure Arc, from what I've seen, can save customers over 40% the cost of extended security updates. So let's say you were going to try to buy the ESU for 100 grand. If you use the Azure Arc enabled server option, you might save 40 grand on that 100 grand.
And that feature didn't exist before. That got introduced fairly recently, where Azure Arc is really a tool that was meant for something else, but Microsoft recognized the potential of the tool and what all, to your point, it can showcase to clients. And now, to your point, it's the kind of the best of both worlds, where you can have it address your on-premise footprint and your cloud footprint, for those that have started that journey and have that in there, and still get that extended support and coverage that you're looking for.
And it really helps begin to formulate that migration strategy, that roadmap for your own specific, needs in infrastructure design.
So let's talk a little bit deeper about ESU. So, end of life, as we mentioned, is in October, and ESU is meant to give you an extended, buffer. So Microsoft recognizes sometimes our organizations are in this position and they have to have something. So they don't want to leave you out there in the wind, even though they gave an announcement and they gave everyone ample heads up. And I think, Steve, you mentioned that there's a really great site that tells all the end of lives that are forthcoming. So it's not like you have to wait for the announcement. They have timelines already outlined for most products.
Yeah, there's a link that we'll share at the end via post, email follow-up. That is what we call ending support in 2023 and beyond. And it's all about the Microsoft life cycle for all of our major products and minor products. And you can literally click on every year between 2023, probably go about 10 years past, and you'll be able to see every year what's rolling off, what's going to be unsupported. And you can begin to make those plans way in advance, which is what, I think is my underlying message here is let's get ahead of this stuff so we're not dealing with it 3 weeks right before.
Absolutely. So ESUs give you that 3 additional years, right? So 3 years is a lot, right? You get, again, to your point, there were links that tell you the timeline of end of lives. Last year, Microsoft announced that the end of life is coming, but even then, you have the opportunity to use the extended security updates. So at a minimum, for the next 3 years, to give you plenty of time to ensure that you have a strategy on moving off of these legacy tools, you're protected from a security perspective. So that's important. We talked about why, but the ESUs is what that is, and where Microsoft would ultimately like you to go if you're gonna hold on to those 2012 R2s.
If you're in a position where you need to just buy time, this is what I call the buy time option, right? You need to buy yourself some time, right? For whatever reason, right? To do it better in the future, then this is it. But it's a very expensive option.
It is.
And so, there's no discounting of this, the price is what it is, and that's what you need to pay. And so, my guidance here is that if this is what you've got to do, go do it. But start planning, start getting that foundational understanding, skilling done in-house. Identify your partners like Velosio to help you on the journey, and get the roadmap going. Do that inventory. Figure out what you really got out there and what could and would move to the cloud if you were to go through migration.
And like you said, you can purchase ESUs and they're very pricey, or you can leverage the Azure Arc that has ESU already in there. And what it does is it integrates with your on-premise environment. So Azure Arc allows you to discover those workstations, workloads, boxes, virtual machines that are on-premise, and have them visible inside of Azure Arc. And then there's an opportunity inside of there to enable the ESU, right? So that way, even though they're on premise, they're getting some level of protection, because Azure is going to push down the support through the ESU entitlements to your on-premise environment. So again, you're buying yourself some time, but you're also starting that footprint of Azure for your organization.
Right.
So that's option 3, and I like option 3. What about option 4? Because this is an option, right? You could go in and just upgrade to 2012. Like, you can take your workstation and try to upgrade it to the latest and greatest, which right now is 2012, and put yourself in a good spot. So
2022.
I'm sorry, 2022. You're right. I caught myself with the decade.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I look at these as band-aids. I'm looking at it from a practical business perspective, not a technical perspective, right? technical hat off, business hat on. I'm putting Band-Aids on a problem I know is still going to be there. And so, you know, what do I really materially gain by upgrading to Windows Server 22? It just buys me some more time, right? And that's fine, but I'm still on-prem. And so as long as I'm on-prem, I'm not gaining full maximum value that my competitors are who are already in the cloud. And I think that that's something that, you know, frequently IT will not focus on that. They will, that discussion is usually not had, maybe at the CIO, CTO level, CFO level, you know, when they're in a private huddle, board of directors meeting about ways to improve the business, add some value and velocity to the digital transformation. But to me, this is just a Band-Aid, just playing devil's advocate. Yeah, it buys you more time, but at the end of the day, where do you want to be? Where does your business have to be in order to become competitive?
Well, from a technical perspective, because you have a point on the business side, from a technical perspective, upgrading, I heard 2008. I hope nobody has a 2003 box out there. Upgrading 2012 box. There is risk in upgrading a server, right? There could be compatibility issues. If you're running a Windows 2012 box, likely the application that's running there is not able to tolerate a higher operating system.
All right, so you could break it.
Yes, you could. Absolutely. There could be compatibility issues. Again, in the upgrade process, there's a possibility of disrupting operations. And it's interesting because sometimes when I have conversations with clients, this is usually beyond, they don't always know about the ESU opportunity there. So option 3 is, again, one that I do like. But I usually get, hey, well, I just upgrade to Windows Server 2022. I'm like, yeah, you could, but we need to look at your application. Is it going to support this latest and greatest operating system? Probably not. And in order to do, let's say it does, we're talking about, again, a possible risk of disrupting the operations because we're taking the version of your operating system and upgrading it. And you never know. A lot of us inherit our systems from other technologists. Maybe we've had it all the time, so we know everything, but you just never know what's possible and what can happen when you upgrade the operating system. So while it is an option, there is inherent risk. And typically, when some organizations elect to go this route, there is hesitation from the technical team because it's not like you're in there every day upgrading operating systems. It's not, otherwise you wouldn't be on Windows 2012 R2 or 2012, right? Or whatever version you're running. It's not something that happens often and it's not very commonplace. There's a risk of, again, something going wrong, but there might not be expertise to do it properly and handle all the if possibilities that can happen there. So
well, think about the hardware peripherals too that might be attached to a server. You know, I mean, I remember when Windows, God, I'm talking desktop, right? I'm not talking server, but I'm remembering like when Windows 8.1 came out, and I had a Windows 7 laptop, and I did the upgrade. Said congratulations. Half my apps wouldn't run, but now my 2 terabyte backup unit that was attached to it was DOA. Couldn't access anything. And so I've got a whole, you know, closet full of old devices and stuff that have family pictures and videos and stuff that I can't access because the operating system basically trashed the whole thing.
Yeah, and again, you're right. The hardware is absolutely a factor here too. And that, again, that's the concern of upgrading. While it does buy time, there's a little bit more risk involved in that option. That most of the time my technical counterparts are like, eh. And then when they do discuss, you know, that being an option that they want to pursue, 9 times out of 10, it's not something that they do in-house. It's not very commonplace for technologists to upgrade because of that. You never know what's going to break. You have a million apps, system services, what have you, that could break. And then what do? You roll back and you're back where you're at, or you may suffer an app. So
rolling back isn't always easy. It's not always possible. So let's go to option 5.
Let's go to 5. So, wow, migrating to Azure.
What an idea.
I know, right? So migrating into Azure, what why is that a benefit? Why is that an option? What's a good reason to do this? I mean, like we said, Azure's been around for a bit now, and it's solid. It has its platform. It has a plethora of services, and yet many haven't adopted Azure yet. So why move servers into Azure?
You know, people tend to just look at it either technically or financially, and I think you have to look at it from both perspectives. You know, from a business perspective, a financial perspective, you got to think about all of your costs about running all these servers in your own on-prem data centers. I mean, there's everything from the software itself you're running, the hardware, the peripherals, your support agreements for all of those things, software and hardware, keeping an inventory of replacement parts and replacement boxes just in case something goes down, you want to be covered. So that's your backup and continuity plan. Floor space, rack space, power, cooling. You know, I mean, the list just kind of goes on and on. And so your TCO for maintaining those on-prem data centers is really costly. And then, you know, if you look at it from the technical side, you know, if you were to put it in the cloud, what would you gain? And you know, how would it maybe simplify some things as well, right? And you know, when I think of gains, I think just because you're moving your stuff from on-prem to the cloud, that's not the whole thinking you need to have. It's not just looking for a place for your stuff, to quote George Carlin. It's really a question of what are you going to do with your stuff when it's in the cloud? And if we're just talking about storage, that's only half of the equation. I mean, Microsoft just invested $15 billion in OpenAI and ChatGPT. So now you have access to all of this, right? And why wouldn't you want to leverage that? Why wouldn't you want to have cloud-based analytics and BI for your, you know, for all of that data that you've got in silos of on-prem systems? And so there's a million ways, but you really need to look at it from both the business and the technical side.
I agree. And so moving into Azure immediately helps with the future proofing in the sense that, again, we're addressing the end of life that's forthcoming, right? So we're making sure that your workloads are supported and you have everything you need. But not only does it address the immediate concern, now you put yourself, I liken it to real estate. So you're putting yourself in a scenario where you're gonna be in a proper spot to enjoy the benefits of where you're located. And in this case, moving your workloads into Azure does that for you, right? You have the scalability, you have all these services that you mentioned that are now within arm's reach of your workloads, so that you can start to really unwind and say, all right, now I've taken care of the security concern, because, you know, I haven't met an organization yet that doesn't tell me that security is not a concern to them. It's always a concern. Sure, you may have things in place that are going to reduce that concern for you, which is always a plus. But you're putting yourself in a space where you're getting in the area of all these additional new services. You mentioned AI. There's tool sets that are getting introduced every day, every week, every month by Microsoft and even their counterparts, third-party services that can integrate easily. And now you put your workload in a safe spot. And to your point, where you're not just putting stuff to put stuff somewhere, but now you're putting your stuff somewhere where you can effectively say, hey, what more can I do with this stuff now? I've always talked about this, and I've heard people say this and that, and I know that some challenges can be addressed, but now you're in the proximity of these different tool sets that can help envision and pull through what you're trying to get done.
It makes you more agile, right? At the end of the day, right? I mean, right now, you know, if you're on-prem and someone says, hey, you know, somebody in business development had an idea for something. Okay, well, we need a box. We need somebody to configure the box. We need to put the operating system on the box. We need the application written and put into the box. And then we're going to put the box along with the other boxes, and we're going to put power on the box. I mean, you know, it's not like a one and done type of thing, right? Whereas with Azure, I mean, you literally go into your console and spin up a VM like that and move your software on, and you're off and you're running, and all that typical old world infrastructure concerns that you have are gone. You have economy of scale. You can flex up and flex down, pay as you go. So it's not always on necessarily.
There's lots of services here. I mean, it doesn't even scratch the surface of all the things that are, because Azure is such a catch-all. It's hard for people to just envision, and I love this, and it's really, again, just scratching the surface on what's available inside of Azure. But Azure is so much more than just X or Y or even Z. It's just, there's so much. And again, this is what we were talking about, right? Where an organization can be more agile, they can be more nimble, they can adapt, they can keep up with their counterparts. And again, like we're talking about, again, addressing the immediate, but you're going to get a twofer here where you're addressing the immediate, but you're also setting yourself up for more stuff.
Yeah, for more success. I mean, you know, when I first came to Microsoft 6 years ago, I just thought Azure was sincerely just a place for your stuff. It's just storage. And if you look at, you know, I'd say, you know, half of my customers are probably just using it for storage. And so I'll pull this up every once in a while and say, do you realize what you're missing out on? And then I show them this and walk them through this kind of periodic chart of elements, so to speak. And they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. I've been looking at third-party solutions for a lot of these things. And I could do this all under the umbrella of Azure. And it's like, you have no idea what you can do with Azure. You need to stop thinking of it as just a big box to store things and think of it as the world's largest intelligent computer, which it really is. And you know, each one of these boxes, and if you know, this is a screenshot, but you can literally scroll down. There's over 200 services in Azure today. That's a lot.
Absolutely. So let's talk about door number 6, this magical door that exists here that we're about to talk about there.
Okay.
So we don't have anything out here that explains door number 6, but what is door number 6?
Yeah, you have an explanation in your next slide.
Oh, well, I wanted to hint at it. So we talked about not doing anything. We talked about decomming, upgrading, ESUs, all these different options, but there is actually a 6th option. And before we go into what that 6th door is, it's time for another poll.
Okay.
What is stopping you from moving into the cloud?
Curious to see what this one will be.
Yeah. And look, the great thing is most of the attendees, they have some cloud presence. So it's great to hear, because I hope that at this point you've recognized some value. You may have scratched the surface. I have to anticipate that there's a lot more, even within the cloud services you have today, that you probably could deep dive and adopt further. There's always, you know, even with the Microsoft 365, which was very popular in the original poll, there's stuff that's getting added there every day that maybe hasn't been revisited since you went into Microsoft 365. So there's, again, that example alone just continues to showcase Microsoft continues to add value. So you're getting a lot for what you're getting inside the cloud, so that you're constantly going, oh, what's this? And how can I use this to better my work experience, how to better the organization's business processes, and a plethora of other things that you can do with it. So,
all right, we have the majority of people who have voted here, and it looks like, you know, quite a few people still have these on-prem legacy applications, some fear in the people on the call today, and then not knowing where to start, and no support or money to invest.
So it's a smattering of all, sounds like. So
I think we can answer that 6th door question.
Let's go to the 6th door. Go for it. So the 6th door, when we're talking about the 6th door, oops, I went back a little bit. We're talking about modernizing your applications in general. So the whole time we've been talking about just kind of like the operating system and our traditional understanding of how we run our organizations, right? We have a server, it has an operating system, there's some software installed in there, and it runs it runs whatever it's supposed to run. And that's awesome. That was technology, for the most part. Nowadays, when you hear organizations talk about modernization, they're really talking about there's all these other tools out there that are beyond your traditional virtual machine, beyond just having a server running something on it. It's a modern piece of software that's specifically designed for XYZ, typically in the cloud and not necessarily contained into one server, but more a service across an ecosystem. So when we talk about door number 6, we're really talking about modernizing. And some of that really is sprinkled across the other options, right? So decomming can also be coupled with, to Steve's point, there might be applications that people use that is older and still critical, but is an older version. There might be something new inside the Azure services that could take over for that. You don't have to put a server running an operating system, because we're going to run across this issue over and over again, right? We talked about end of life is going to be a cycle that's in the timeline. Windows Server 2022 will eventually end of life, and so on and so on. And getting away from that and going into services, that could be a way to modernize your world, where there might have been an application that was in its legacy state at that point, and putting it into a service that is serverless for most of the time, for most of this service tier, and provide what you need in a more modern approach.
Right.
And I know in the poll there was concern. How do we start? Costing, all the different things. Like, just remember that, Steve, I know you're there to help and guide. Velosio is here to help and guide. You're not in it alone. I think the biggest message, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, is let's talk about these things, these concerns, before we get to an end of life date like October for Windows 2012 R2, and start talking about what do you have in house, what applications are running your business, what challenges are you facing? All these different questions. There should be periodic conversations about all of that, and then we can start to break apart and understand, well, here's how you start your journey. Here are the different phases. I mean, modernization is not something, it's not a one-shot thing. It is meant to be, hey, let's look at it. Think again, I'm very big on the house analogy, right? When you buy your home, for those that own a home, those projects are never done. It's a solid investment, in my opinion. And you're gonna go through your home, aka your technology and what's running your organization. You're gonna start to break apart what's important, what's critical here, what to focus on, how do you best address it. Look for experts, look for guidance, and expertise to address these different things. And then you start working at different rooms or different levels, different floors, different tactics, whatever makes sense for the organization. And then it becomes an iterative approach, so that you're constantly improving and making things better, versus waiting for a pipe to burst, which I know can happen regardless of proactive planning. But you get my drift and where I'm going with this. Or instead of waiting for something to break or something that could possibly break, you're taking care and maintaining the infrastructure that runs the organization.
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid to ask questions, right?
Yeah.
We've all been in that classroom environment, right, where the teacher says, any questions? And everybody looks at each other because nobody wants to look stupid, right?
All right.
It's a natural human, feeling, right? And it's the same thing with wanting to have this conversation with experts, but afraid of looking stupid, right? Don't be afraid of looking stupid. This stuff changes so radically fast, right?
Yeah.
Just look at the AI announcements that come out every day, right? So what was new yesterday is old by next week. And so it's the same thing that we're talking about here is, you need to have a reliable set of partners. We think Microsoft and Velosio make a great combination. And B, you just need to make some time to sit down and ask the questions. Don't worry about how it sounds, right? We get asked these questions all the time. We're having this conversation in real time every single day. And so let us help educate you and provide that foundational understanding that you want and need. And then together, we can assess, take inventory, and begin to build out that roadmap for you so that you don't find yourself 3 weeks out from an end of life date wondering what to do or what
Now,
exposure you have if you choose to do nothing.
I mean, don't get me wrong, Steve, but I'm sure you and I have been put in scenarios where we have to put our fireman hat out and, put out fires, and we're more than happy to do that. But yeah, to your point, that's the point of this webinar, is really to start that thought process. How can we sit down and start thinking, or even you can start thinking through, hey, what else do I have going on? What's the next end of life forthcoming? What are some challenges? How can we there's a plethora of questions I'm sure you can ask. We can work through deployment. We can even develop, we can support, you can work with us as much or as little as you need. The point is, you're not in it on your own. Even at a minimum, if you got something out of this webinar and knowing your options, that's better than whatever hasn't happened before this.